I never thought my cousin Mark's wedding would be the day my life unraveled. The invitation came a few months ago, a glossy white card with gold trimming, boasting the words, "Join us as Mark and Anna celebrate their union." Mark was like a brother to me growing up. We shared every holiday, every childhood secret, every triumph and failure. And Anna? She was my everything. My confidant, my partner, the woman I pictured a future with. So, when I opened that invitation, I smiled at the thought of celebrating two people I cared about deeply. I showed up at the venue early. It was breathtaking. An old cathedral with vaulted ceilings, walls covered in intricate carvings, and sunlight streaming through stained glass windows, painting the pews in shades of amber and blue. Guests dressed in their finest were scattered throughout the space, their laughter echoing faintly. Everything about it screamed elegance, perfection, a perfect day for a perfect union. Or so I thought. As I sat quietly in the back row, I scanned the program. Mark and Anna. Just those two names. A simple pairing, nothing unusual. But something didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way the name Anna seemed to leap off the page, or the faint itch of doubt that tugged at my chest. I shook it off, convincing myself I was overthinking. After all, Anna was supposed to be out of town visiting family that weekend. She hadn't mentioned anything about attending the wedding, let alone being part of it. The music swelled, and the guests turned their heads in unison as the bride stepped into the aisle. My first instinct was to look away, give her the privacy of her grand entrance. But when I did glance up, I froze. My body went rigid, and I felt the air leave my lungs. It was Anna, my Anna, walking down the aisle in a white dress. I don't remember the next few seconds. I think I was holding my breath, trying to convince myself I was mistaken. I blinked hard, as though my eyes were playing tricks on me. But it wasn't a mistake. Her stride, her smile, everything about her was unmistakable. It felt like the walls of the cathedral were closing in around me, the murmurs of the crowd muffled beneath the deafening sound of my own heartbeat. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to demand an explanation right there. But my legs wouldn't move. My voice caught in my throat. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, none of them making sense. How could this be happening? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I seen it coming? Mark, oblivious to the hurricane brewing inside me, stood at the altar, beaming as she approached. His smile was genuine, full of love and pride, like he had just won the lottery. The betrayal stung even deeper seeing his joy. Anna's eyes flickered across the crowd, and for a split second, they landed on me. I don't know if she recognized me immediately, but when she did, I saw her expression falter, just barely. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I caught it. I slipped out of my seat quietly, every step feeling heavier than the last. My head was spinning, my heart pounding against my chest. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to escape. The echo of my footsteps filled the corridor as I left the ceremony behind. When I reached the parking lot, I leaned against my car, gasping for air like I'd just surfaced from drowning. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone. A part of me wanted to text Anna, to demand answers. Another part of me wanted to call Mark, to scream at him for his betrayal, but I did neither. Instead, I just stared at the blank screen, paralyzed by the enormity of what I'd just seen. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let this go. They had lied to me, deceived me, humiliated me in a way I could never forgive. And they were going to pay for it. Before we continue, a quick reminder. 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying this story, please support our channel by subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss an upload. Tell us where you are listening from. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. As I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, memories came flooding back, each one hitting me like a sledgehammer. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or just drive until the pain stopped. But the memories wouldn't let me escape. They came uninvited, relentless, like waves crashing against a weakening dam. I met Anna 3 years ago at a small cafe on the edge of town. I remember that day so clearly. The way the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. She was sitting alone by the window, her notebook open, doodling aimlessly. I don't even know why I approached her. I wasn't the kind of guy to make the first move. But there was something about her, something that made me feel like I had to say hello. She looked up, smiled, and in that moment, it felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together. We clicked instantly. It wasn't just her beauty that drew me in. It was her wit, her humor, the way she could light up a room with a single sentence. We spent hours talking that day, and by the time we parted, I knew I'd met someone special. That was the start of it all. The first year with Anna was like a dream. We traveled together, laughed until our stomachs hurt, stayed up late talking about our hopes and fears. She was the first person I truly opened up to about my struggles, my insecurities. I told her about losing my dad when I was 10, how Mark had stepped up to fill that void, how I always felt like I was living in Mark's shadow but could never resent him for it. She listened, understood, and made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. But then, things started to change. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow shift, so gradual I barely noticed it at first. She started canceling plans more often, her excuses vague and unconvincing. "Work's been hectic," she'd say, or "I'm just really tired tonight." At first, I believed her. I told myself it was just a phase, that she'd bounce back. But then there were the late-night phone calls she'd step outside to take, the way she'd quickly lock her phone whenever I walked into the room. Little things that didn't seem like much on their own, but painted a different picture when put together. I brought it up once, just once. We were having dinner at our favorite Italian place, a small family-owned restaurant where the owner knew us by name. I remember how I stumbled over my words, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Anna," I said, "is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." She looked up from her plate, startled, almost like she'd been caught off guard. But then she smiled, reached across the table to take my hand, and said, "Of course, Ethan. I'm sorry if I've seemed off. Work's just been overwhelming lately, but I'll make it up to you. I promise." And I believed her. Because that's what love does, doesn't it? It blinds you, makes you want to believe the best in someone even when the evidence is staring you in the face. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. And for a while, things seemed to go back to normal. But now, sitting in that parking lot, everything clicked into place. The missed dates, the secretive behavior, the sudden trips out of town. It was all leading up to this. She wasn't distant because of work. She was distant because she was building a life with Mark behind my back. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my gut. And the worst part was that I hadn't seen it coming. I trusted her. I trusted them both. And Mark. God, Mark. I thought about all the times he'd been there for me, the times I'd confided in him about Anna, about how much she meant to me. He'd listened, given advice, played the part of the supportive cousin, all while he was sleeping with her, planning a future with her. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. How could he look me in the eye, sit across from me at family dinners, and pretend like nothing was happening? How could they both lie to me so effortlessly? I thought about the holidays we'd spent together, the laughter, the inside jokes. It all felt tainted now, like a cruel joke I was the last one to get. Every memory was laced with bitterness, every moment of happiness overshadowed by the betrayal that had been lurking in the background all along. And then there was the ring. I'd been saving up for months, working overtime to afford the perfect engagement ring. I hadn't told anyone, not even Mark, because I wanted it to be a surprise. I'd planned to propose to Anna on our next anniversary, at the same cafe where we first met. I could still picture it, the look on her face, the way she'd say yes, the life we'd build together. That dream was shattered now, crushed beneath the weight of their lies. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I didn't know how, but I was going to make them feel every ounce of the pain they'd caused me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my sense of self. They'd taken so much from me already, but I wasn't going to let them take my future too. I started the car and drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring into streaks of color through the windshield. My mind was racing, replaying every moment, every conversation, every missed sign. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the anger had hardened into resolve. They thought they could get away with this, but they were wrong. I was going to make sure they paid for what they'd done, and I wasn't going to stop until they did. The first step was information. If I was going to dismantle their lives, I needed to understand how deep the betrayal ran. I started small. I went through my old messages with Anna, scrolling back months, maybe years, to find moments that didn't add up. A night she claimed she was working late, but sent me a random picture from a restaurant I'd never been to. A weekend she said she was visiting her mom, but went completely silent. The more I pieced it together, the more it felt like a giant puzzle, one where the picture forming was too grotesque to look at. And then there was Mark. I replayed every interaction we'd had over the past year. The times he'd casually asked how Anna was doing, his face unreadable as I gushed about her. The way he seemed to linger whenever she was around during family gatherings. It was all so obvious now, so glaringly clear, but I hadn't wanted to see it. I needed more. I went through Anna's social media first. It wasn't easy. She had always been careful about what she posted, but I found subtle clues, pictures tagged in places she'd never mentioned to me, likes on Mark's posts that felt too frequent, too familiar. Then I turned to Mark's profile. My stomach churned as I found pictures of them together, moments that looked innocent to an outsider but screamed betrayal to me. A photo of Mark and Anna sitting at a table during what looked like a family dinner. She was smiling, her hand resting just a little too close to his on the table. The caption? Grateful for nights like these. Grateful, my ass. I wasn't satisfied. This wasn't enough to bring them down. Not yet. So, I did something I'd never done before. I hacked into Anna's email. It wasn't hard. I knew her password. It was the name of her childhood dog, a detail she'd shared during one of our many late-night talks. The moment her inbox loaded, my hands started to shake. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew I'd find something. And I did. Email after email, exchanged between her and Mark, detailing plans for trips they'd taken together, excuses they'd come up with to keep me in the dark, and even wedding preparations. They had been meticulous, careful, but not careful enough. One email in particular made my blood boil. It was from Anna to Mark, sent just 2 weeks ago. The subject line read, "I can't wait to be your wife." The body of the email was even worse. She talked about how much she loved him, how excited she was to start their life together, and how she wished she could tell me the truth but didn't want to hurt me. Didn't want to hurt me? That was rich, considering what they'd already done. I slammed my laptop shut, my chest heaving. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I paced back and forth, my mind racing with possibilities. I could confront them, burst into their perfect little world, and watch it crumble under the weight of their lies. But that wasn't enough. No, they didn't deserve a confrontation. They deserved destruction. The second step was execution. I started planning in earnest, laying out every detail like a general preparing for war. I saved screenshots of the emails, downloaded photos from their social media accounts, and even compiled a timeline of their affair. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, I had everything I needed to ruin them. But I wasn't done digging. I needed to understand why. Why Anna had betrayed me. Why Mark, who had been like a brother to me, had decided I was disposable. That's when I remembered something. A small detail I'd almost forgotten. Months ago, during one of our family dinners, I'd overheard Mark joking with one of our uncles about always getting what he wanted. At the time, it seemed harmless, just playful banter. Now, it felt like a clue. I started asking questions, casually bringing up Mark in conversations with family members, pretending I was just catching up. Most of what I learned was irrelevant. Stories from his childhood, anecdotes about his work. But then, my aunt let something slip. She mentioned how Mark had always been jealous of me, how he used to complain that I got all the attention from our grandparents growing up. It was a throwaway comment, one she didn't think twice about, but it hit me like a freight train. Mark didn't just want Anna. He wanted to hurt me. This wasn't about love. It was about power, about proving something to himself. The realization stung more than I thought it would. I'd always seen Mark as the confident one, the one who had it all together. But underneath it all, he was just as insecure as the rest of us, maybe even more so. And now, his insecurity had cost me everything. The third step was patience. I couldn't act impulsively. If I wanted my revenge to be as devastating as their betrayal, I needed to bide my time. I spent days perfecting my plan, rehearsing what I would say, how I would reveal everything. I started to feel a twisted sense of satisfaction, imagining their faces when they realized the depth of their failure, the enormity of their mistake. But there were moments, quiet, late-night moments, when the anger gave way to something else, something softer, sadder. I found myself thinking about the good times, the memories that still felt too fresh to ignore. I hated that part of myself, the part that still cared, still wanted to believe it wasn't all a lie. But I couldn't dwell on that. I had to stay focused, had to remember what they'd done to me. And so, I waited. I waited for the perfect moment to strike, to unleash everything I'd been holding inside. I didn't know exactly how it would play out, but I knew one thing for certain. When it was over, they would never forget what they'd done to me. The wedding reception was where I planned to strike. Everything about it screamed opulence. An open bar, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet playing softly in the background. It was a celebration they had meticulously curated, a picture-perfect moment they had spent months, maybe years, dreaming of, and I was going to tear it apart in ways they wouldn't see coming. I arrived late, dressed sharply, blending into the crowd with practiced ease. No one batted an eye as I made my way through the throng of guests, champagne glasses clinking and laughter echoing in the air. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was eerily calm, my every step measured, my resolve unshakable. This wasn't a moment for hesitation or doubt. It was a moment for action. I had rehearsed this in my mind countless times. The speech, the timing, the precise moment I would drop the metaphorical bomb that would leave their perfect night in ruins. But even with all the planning, there was something exhilarating about the unpredictability of it all. I didn't know exactly how they would react, and that made it all the more satisfying. The first thing I did was approach the DJ. I handed him a USB drive and a crisp bill, leaning in close to make sure he understood the instructions. "Play this when I give you the signal," I said. He hesitated for a moment, perhaps sensing something off, but the money in his hand was enough to silence any objections. With that done, I slipped into the crowd, positioning myself near the head table where Mark and Anna sat, basking in the glow of their stolen happiness. The evening unfolded like any other wedding. Speeches were made, toasts were given, and the dance floor filled with couples swaying to the rhythm of the music. I bided my time, watching, waiting, studying their every move. Mark, ever the charmer, laughed easily with the guests, his arm draped possessively around Anna's shoulders. Anna, for her part, played the role of the radiant bride flawlessly, her smile wide, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. To anyone else, they were the perfect couple, but I knew better. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate. I stepped onto the small stage set up for the speeches, microphone in hand. The room quieted almost instantly, all eyes turning to me. My heart was pounding, but I didn't let it show. I cleared my throat, smiling faintly as I began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice steady, almost casual. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ethan, Mark's cousin. I've known Mark my whole life, and I've known Anna for the past 3 years. In fact, I've known Anna so well that I used to call her my girlfriend." The room fell silent. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the space, the weight of my words hanging heavy over the crowd. I saw the confusion on their faces, the murmurs starting to spread like wildfire. And then I saw Mark and Anna. Mark's smile froze, his eyes narrowing as he processed what I'd just said. Anna's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I know this might come as a surprise to some of you," I continued, my tone deceptively light. "It certainly came as a surprise to me when I found out my girlfriend of 3 years was marrying my cousin. But hey, life's full of surprises, right?" I paused, letting the silence stretch, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. And then I gave the signal. The DJ, true to his word, hit play on the file I had given him. The speakers crackled to life, and the room was filled with the sound of Anna's voice. It was one of the emails she had sent to Mark, the words spilling out like poison. She talked about their secret meetings, their plans to keep me in the dark, her excitement about becoming his wife. It was all there, every sordid detail, playing out for everyone to hear. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, cries of shock and disbelief. I saw Mark lunge out of his seat, his face a mask of fury, but he stopped short when the images began to flash on the screen behind me. Photos of them together. On trips, at dinners, even in moments that were clearly meant to be private. The evidence was undeniable, the betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. Anna stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Mark tried to say something, to explain, but his words were drowned out by the chaos erupting around us. Guests were standing, shouting, some filming the spectacle on their phones. It was a complete and utter disaster. I stepped down from the stage, my work done, and walked toward the exit. But as I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Mark and Anna were standing in the middle of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their perfect night. They looked at me, their faces a mixture of anger, shame, and despair. I held their gaze, my expression calm, unyielding. "Enjoy the rest of your lives," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "You deserve each other." And with that, I walked out into the night, leaving the chaos behind me. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. They had taken so much from me, but in that moment, I had taken something back. My dignity, my strength, my voice. Those words echoed in my mind as I walked through the cold night air, leaving behind the chaos I had unleashed. At first, there was a rush, a brief, almost intoxicating sense of victory. They were exposed, humiliated, their lies ripped open for everyone to see. The image of their faces, the collective gasp of the guests, it was all so vivid. But as I drove away, the adrenaline started to fade, and the weight of what I had done began to settle in. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the silence felt deafening. The car engine hummed softly as I sat there, staring at the empty street outside my home. I had planned every moment of that night, thought through every possible outcome, but nothing prepared me for the hollowness that followed. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt empty. The kind of emptiness that wraps around you like a fog, making it hard to see or feel anything clearly. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Mark's rage, Anna's tears, the crowd's stunned expressions. I wasn't sure if I was haunted by guilt or simply overwhelmed by the finality of it all. There was no going back now, no undoing what I had done. I had burned that bridge, and I'd made sure the fire was visible for miles. The next day, the calls started. At first, I ignored them. My phone buzzed incessantly, family, friends, even numbers I didn't recognize. I knew what they wanted. They wanted explanations, answers, maybe even an apology. But I had nothing to say to them. What could I say that would make any of it make sense? So, I let the calls go to voicemail, one after the other, until the buzzing finally stopped. But the silence didn't last long. My aunt showed up unannounced, her face a mixture of concern and anger. She didn't wait to be invited in, pushing past me into the living room. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharp, "what were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "I did what I had to do," I said evenly. "They deserved it." "Deserved it?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You embarrassed the entire family. People are talking, Ethan. This isn't just about Mark and Anna anymore. It's about all of us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Oh, now it's about the family? Where was this concern when Mark was stabbing me in the back? Where was it when Anna was lying to my face? Don't lecture me about family when they were the ones who destroyed it." Her expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. "You're hurt. I get it. But this wasn't the way to handle it." I didn't respond. There was no point. She wouldn't understand. No one would. To them, I was the villain now, the one who had crossed the line, while Mark and Anna became the victims of my rage. It didn't matter that they had lied, betrayed me, shattered my trust. People love a good redemption story, and I wasn't interested in giving them one. After she left, I sat in the quiet, replaying her words. Part of me wanted to believe she was right, that there had been another way to handle things. But the larger part of me, The part still raw with anger and pain refused to accept that. They had taken everything from me. What was I supposed to do? Smile, nod, and pretend it didn't matter? In the days that followed, the fallout continued. Mark and Anna's perfect image was shattered. The whispers I'd started at their wedding turned into full-blown rumors. Family members began to take sides, some defending them, others condemning them. My mother called, her voice tight with worry as she begged me to meet with Mark and talk things out. I told her there was nothing to talk about. "Ethan," she said softly, "this anger, it's going to destroy you if you let it." "It's not anger," I replied, my voice flat. "It's clarity. For the first time, I see things for what they really are." But she wasn't entirely wrong. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it wasn't the kind of anger that exploded outward. It was quieter, more insidious, the kind that eats away at you slowly, leaving you hollow. I hated that they still had that power over me, that even after everything, they were still taking up space in my mind. One night, a few weeks after the wedding, I found myself sitting in the same cafe where Anna and I had first met. I hadn't planned to go there. My car had simply taken me, as though it knew I needed to confront the ghosts that lingered there. The place hadn't changed. The same soft jazz played in the background, the same barista worked behind the counter. But it felt different, smaller somehow, like it had shrunk under the weight of what had happened. I sat in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the world move on without me. A part of me wanted to wallow in the past, to cling to the memories of what could have been. But another part, the part that still had a shred of hope, refused to let me. I couldn't live like this forever. I couldn't let their betrayal define me. It wasn't easy, but that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to forgive them. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. They had already taken enough, and I refused to give them anything more. As I left the cafe, the weight on my shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. And that was enough for now. The weeks that followed weren't a miraculous transformation. I didn't wake up one day feeling whole again or suddenly forget the pain. Healing doesn't work that way. It's messy, uneven, like taking one step forward and two steps back. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The weight I carried, the anger that burned inside me, started to ease its grip. I threw myself into work first. I figured if I couldn't fix my personal life, at least I could focus on something I could control. Late nights at the office turned into early mornings, and soon, my hard work began to pay off. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, handing me a promotion that came with a corner office and a significant raise. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward, like I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. But it wasn't just about work. I started reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during my relationship with Anna. At first, I hesitated, unsure if they'd want me around after the spectacle I'd made at the wedding. But to my surprise, they welcomed me back without hesitation. We spent hours catching up, laughing, sharing stories. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I still had people in my corner. It was during one of those nights, sitting around a bonfire with a few close friends, that something clicked. One of them, Rachel, said something that stuck with me. "You can't let what they did define you, Ethan. You're not just the guy who got betrayed. You're more than that." Her words stayed with me, echoing in the back of my mind as I began to rebuild my life. I started going to therapy, something I'd resisted for far too long. At first, it felt awkward, sitting in a room with a stranger and spilling my darkest thoughts. But over time, it became a lifeline. I learned to unpack my anger, my hurt, my guilt. I learned that it was okay to feel those things, but I didn't have to let them consume me. One of the hardest parts of therapy was confronting my own role in what had happened. No, I wasn't to blame for their betrayal, but I had ignored the signs, overlooked the cracks, because I wanted so desperately to believe in the life I thought I was building with Anna. I had to face that part of myself, the part that clung to an illusion even when the truth was staring me in the face. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As the months went by, I found myself smiling more, laughing more. I started going out again, meeting new people, exploring hobbies I'd put on the back burner. I took up photography, something I'd always been passionate about but never had the time for. There was something therapeutic about capturing moments through a lens, finding beauty in the ordinary. One evening, as I was wandering through a park with my camera, I met someone. Her name was Claire. She was sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook, her face lit by the golden glow of the setting sun. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready to open myself up to someone new. But something about her drew me in, reminded me of the way I used to feel before everything fell apart. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. She had a warmth about her, a way of making you feel like you'd known her forever. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, a flicker of something I thought I'd lost forever. We exchanged numbers, and as I walked away, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. As I stood on the porch of my apartment later that night, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not just for love, but for myself, for the life I was rebuilding. I knew there would still be hard days, moments when the past would rear its ugly head, but I also knew I was strong enough to face them. Mark and Anna? They became a distant memory, a chapter I'd closed. I didn't know what became of them, and honestly, I didn't care. They were no longer a part of my story, and that was the greatest revenge of all. Moving on, living my life, and finding happiness despite everything they had done. As I walked back inside, I glanced at my camera sitting on the table. Tomorrow, I'd take it out again, capture more moments, build more memories. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, I was writing it on my terms.